Hi, this is Gavin from FE News. I'm here at EPA Live talking to some of the interesting speakers on the stage, to people in the audience to get the latest developments in endpoint assessment. Hi, this is Gavin from FE News. I'm here at EPA Live and I'm here with Lucy Hunte, who's with the NHS, which is the largest employer in the UK. Lucy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good. So the NHS has got a rather large levy pot, but it's also got its own unique challenges with developing talent of the future and looking to continually develop the existing workforce. With your experience of being the largest employer in the UK, what can the sector learn about where we're at now with endpoint assessment and the future with T Levels, and what we need to be thinking of for the future on how to continuously provide that talent pipeline to employers?
So we have done some mapping, and at the moment it looks like we've got 350 different job roles in the NHS. Obviously people always predominantly think about us as clinical roles, but there's huge back office roles, there's some fantastic career routes. But if we go out to schools and do any sort of engagement, they might be able to name doctor, nurse at a push. If you're lucky, you might get a paramedic. But actually when we then go into conversation around all the different roles and opportunities, quite often in some cities the NHS organisation will be the largest employer, and then you say to them, have you considered working in the NHS? And it's just blank faces. So I think we need to do a lot more about making us the employer of choice. Certainly some rural areas, if they are the biggest employer, but you've got a young person, oh, but I want to do IT, I want to do digital, I want to do events. You can do that in the NHS, and it's just making sure that we get that understanding out there and raise awareness of all the different opportunities that there are.
Thinking around apprenticeships and endpoint assessment, we're EPA Live today, so this is sort of in the forefront of everyone's mind today, really. What are the challenges that you've seen in working with providers and awarding organisations to deliver programmes? Because you obviously got a very diverse set of programmes. And what are the things which you could sort of give back to the sector as a takeaway? Say, what have you considered these things? What is good practice? What are the strategies that you could say to take forward?
Okay, so I think for us, apprenticeships and the levy have been a really positive thing. There is a lot of negativity out there, but obviously you do need to make sure that it's done properly. So it is about engaging with good providers. 20% of the job is cited as a barrier. People perceive that needs to be 1 day a week, but for the NHS, the majority of them are teaching hospitals. They are doing a lot of teaching anyway, and it's making sure that that can be apprenticised and that it can be evidenced, and getting away from that, I'm going to lose someone 1 day a week. For newer recruits, it's not such a challenge because obviously you factor in that they're not going to be with you, they're going to be attending college or doing on-site with their independent training provider. But, for us, in terms of some of the programmes that we've developed, we have got critical shortages in these professions. You've heard about 40,000 nursing vacancies, but in terms of other programmes, little known programmes like podiatry or sonography, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, we've now developed these degree apprenticeships to attract new talent into the NHS. From that young person's point of view, it's a no-brainer. Why would you not do a degree apprenticeship, get your programme funded, have a job at the end of it, rather than do the traditional route, get yourself into debt and not be guaranteed a job?
Can we talk about some of the myth busting you've been involved with?
Yeah, myth busting has been a huge part of what we've had to do. Certainly in some of the clinical areas, there was perceptions that you couldn't have a 16 to 18-year-old, little things like that. And it's really just making sure that you're working with good providers and the employers fully understand the responsibilities and the opportunities that the apprenticeships can bring. There's been so many things around, what the levy can and can't be spent on. And just understanding actually, that is for funding the training programme. But that is a good thing. In the NHS, training budgets have been on the decline for a long time, and now we have got this ring-fenced pot of £200 million that we can spend. That's a positive, that's a good thing. Especially, in terms of it having to be coming away from frontline services. At the beginning of the implementation, there was a lot of negativity, but we need that to go towards treating people. But actually, by training and developing those staff, that is actually going to improve patient care because they're getting good quality education via the apprenticeship programme and therefore going to have the skills that we need them to have.
You mentioned you've just had a presentation here at EPA Live around things to consider when working with large employers. So what are some of the things which you could maybe pass on to the sector to be considering? Because NHS, largest employer in the UK, but also there's also, it's got a small SME element to it, you know, with GP practices through to some hospitals are obviously much larger than others. That's a blended approach, you know. So what could we learn from that as a sector?
I think definitely that not to view the NHS as one organisation. I work with 263 very different NHS trusts, but then we've got 7,000 SMEs in the supply chain, as you mentioned, GP practices, pharmacies and things like that. So it's just making sure that the providers we're working with understand that, you know, what might be suitable in a GP practice is not going to be necessarily suitable in a trust, having that bespoke programme rather than off the shelf. And just understanding the challenges, because with the best will in the world, you know, you've got people down for day release, then there's a critical incident or the hospital's on lockdown, you know, there's a lot of contingencies that you can't always plan for. So it's just making sure that your provider is flexible and kind of understands that, you know, sometimes the day job, and when it is saving lives, is going to get in the way. But again, you know, that also means that the apprentice is going to be at the thick of things and learning stuff on the job that's really going to help the future of the NHS.
That sounds great. We talked earlier around the different volume in starts that's occurred in the NHS, and that's a real success story. So I don't know if you could, instead of me explain it, you know much more about it. I wonder if you could explain that, because that's brilliant news from my side.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. There's been a lot of negativity around the levy and apprenticeships in general, but you know, for us, we have got a public sector target of 28,000. For 18-19 we ended up with just under 24,000, which is a fantastic achievement. On track to achieve the full public sector target this year, on track in terms of levy spend as well, to be committing our 200 million in 2020. So, you know, there's a lot of negativity and stories around money squandering in NHS accounts. To be fair, you know, some of our programmes were still being developed at the introduction of the levy, so that's why we've got that upward spike now. But I just think, yeah, we need a bit of good news story, in that we are, as the NHS, utilising our levy and making sure that we are future-proofing our workforce. And
just to give the audience a bit of context, a year, 2 years ago, how many starts are we talking from? Because that is a massive jump from what I believe it was to 24 to 28,000.
So we were averaging probably around 8,000 a year. So, you know, in terms of the levy, we've definitely got that upward trajectory. And yeah, I think that's a really positive news story. If we can do it with the pressures of the day job as well, in terms of, as we said, you know, we know there's a crisis in the NHS and lack of funding, but the fact that we have now got this dedicated ring-fenced budget to spend on training and development, I think that's a really positive news.
You mentioned earlier around a lot of employers, and you hear this all the time, around employers seeing the 20% off the job as being a negative thing or difficult to be able to sort of factor in. Then you hear other employers where that's, or if you look internationally, that's seen to be absolutely crucial for the quality of apprenticeships. You're talking about, you know, 24,000 starts. To factor that in for all those different roles is amazing, but what advice could you give other employers to be able to help plan to factor in that 20% off the job?
So I think planning is the key. You know, in reality, for our nursing apprenticeships, for example, that actually equates to 60% off the job. So, you know, people bleating about 20%, you know, actually come and deal with some of the issues that we've had to do. But it's that planning. You know, we've got examples of where, for example, in terms of some apprenticeships, we're now having a T Level student come in to backfill them when they're out on their day release. So it's just being creative and looking at ways where you can make sure you've got adequate staff in. I think that in terms of the 20% of job, people come to sometimes hide behind that, use it as a barrier, and it's just really understanding actually, you know, the different ways you can evidence it, and that training is essential to take place. And also, I think that there's always been the job element, but now it's got that 20% attached to it. Suddenly it's seen as much more of an issue. But for us, if you're truly committed to doing apprenticeships, you need to allow your staff that time to actually learn. And for us, the off the job also gives them the opportunity to implement when they're on the job. So you can go to your classroom, you can learn those clinical skills, but then it's actually when you get back to your ward and put them into practice where you're really learning.
You also, it's going to be my next question, but you sort of led me to it, right? T Levels is obviously a major development in the sector at the moment. Mm-hmm. A lot of people see the biggest barrier for T Levels being the work experience element, the industrial placement, or call it what you will. How do you sort of see that moving forward? What can you offer as experience around looking at as the largest employer in the UK to other employers to be able to help them implement T Levels and engaging with learners in their in their environment? Because some of the things that is obviously involved in NHS is very difficult to be able to have someone who's say 16 involved, but obviously you're doing that. So it's what can you share what you've learned around sort of engaging young people and bring them into the business in reality?
So obviously it's all very new and we are still learning, but HE are definitely going to be taking a role in terms of helping kind of manage or coordinate those placements. Again, it's looking at perceptions, because obviously the first waves are ready in terms of digital, and people have said, oh, but that's not going to be relevant for the NHS. Yes, it is. We've got huge digital departments. So it's encouraging our employers to engage with the local providers that are offering T Levels, making sure that these potential students are thinking of us as an employer of choice and as a career pathway and career progression. And yeah, it does need to be managed properly. It is a big commitment from an employer, but I think if it's managed properly, it can be a really good exposure for that young person, because we want them to see us, as I said, an employer of choice. But if they don't know all the range and roles of opportunities that are available, they're not going to be able to make that decision. So I do think, done properly, it could be a really positive thing. There are some concerns in terms of, obviously we've done all this work in terms of apprenticeships. Where is this talent pool going to come from? There's a lot of work that needs to be done around advice and guidance in terms of actually, explaining to young people, and more importantly, parents. My 12-year-old had someone from DFE come in to talk about T Levels the other day, put her hand up and said, I don't understand why anyone would do a T Level and not an apprenticeship. So that's out of the mouth of babes. She came home and told me that, and I was like, well, you need to understand the distinction and things like that. So I think there's a lot of advice and guidance that needs to happen in terms of young people and parents to be able to make that decision properly.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Why not click subscribe so you can be informed when the latest next individual podcasts or podcast mini-series from FE News are going to be released.